I sat at the bar nursing a whiskey, watching her. Catherine. She was laughing across the room with him, the man I had never seen before, but somehow felt like I knew him. His tailored suit, his confidence, the way he leaned in just a little too close, laughing a little too loud, making her laugh the same way she used to laugh with me. I had seen that laugh 1,000 times before, back when it was just for me, when it meant something. But tonight, it didn't. Now it felt rehearsed, hollow, a tool, a charm she used to win over whoever was around her. The dim lighting in the restaurant made it hard to make out the details, but it didn't matter. I knew what I was seeing. I didn't need a clearer picture. Catherine, the woman I'd married, had found someone else, someone more exciting, more confident, someone who made her laugh without the history we shared, the history I thought mattered. I held the envelope in my hand, the divorce papers. She didn't know yet. She wouldn't until it hit her. The papers I had been sitting on for weeks, months maybe, were now finally ready to be delivered. I wasn't just watching them. I was watching everything change. That table, the one they were sitting at, the one that had been ours for years, had always been a place of memories. A place where we shared the details of our day, argued over dumb stuff, laughed over a bottle of wine, or sat in silence. I had thought it was ours forever. But now, it wasn't. Not anymore. I gripped the envelope harder, the cold paper pressing into my fingers as the weight of everything I had been holding on to started to settle in. My marriage was over. Catherine had already checked out. I was just too slow to realize it. And now, the next step, this small act, would be the one thing that would change both of our lives forever. The man with her leaned in close, a hand grazing her arm. Catherine's smile widened, that same practiced smile, one that had once melted my heart but now made me sick. She was leaning into him, letting him get closer in a way she used to let me, years ago. A laugh, that laugh again. I couldn't do it anymore. I stood up, slipping the envelope into the hands of the waitress at the bar. "Take this to Catherine," I said, my voice steady but cold. I didn't need to say much more. The weight of those papers was all I needed to say. I watched as the waitress approached their table, placing the envelope in front of Catherine. I could see the look on her face change instantly. She froze, her smile faltering as she looked down at the envelope. I could tell she wasn't expecting this. She hadn't seen this coming. The man next to her leaned in, clearly confused. "What is it?" he asked. Catherine's eyes darted between the papers and me as I stood from the bar, my feet moving slowly toward the exit. I didn't want to stick around for the fallout. She would figure it out soon enough. Her panic was evident as her eyes locked with mine. It only took a second for everything to click. She knew what it was. Her eyes widened for just a moment, her expression faltering. But then, she composed herself. She always did. But I could see it in the way her fingers trembled, her breath catching just a little too loudly. I didn't wait to hear the rest of the conversation. I gave her a cold smile, turned on my heel, and walked out the door. It was over. I had done what I needed to do. Now, it was up to her to face the consequences of everything she had done. I watched as the waitress walked over to Catherine's table, my heartbeat quickening as the envelope bounced lightly in her hand. For a moment, it felt like everything had paused, the hum of the restaurant quieting in my mind as I focused solely on the delivery. Catherine's eyes followed the waitress as she handed the envelope over. Her brow furrowed in confusion, but I could see her immediately freeze as her fingers brushed over the words, "Petition for divorce." The other man, still unaware of what was unfolding, leaned toward her with a questioning look. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low but laced with genuine concern. I could see it in Catherine's face before she even glanced up at me. Panic, real panic. It was only a flicker, but it was there. Her gaze shot across the room, meeting mine. For a brief second, we locked eyes, and everything in that moment shifted. I wasn't sure if it was the guilt or the realization, but something cracked in her expression. She knew. She knew the game was up. I stood slowly, letting the weight of the situation settle in. There was no need to say anything. No need for dramatic confrontations. Catherine had always been good at controlling situations, manipulating words and faces to get what she wanted. But now, for the first time, she was out of control. I gave her a small, cold smile, one that I hadn't given her in years, and I walked out. I didn't wait for her to speak, to beg, or even to lash out. I didn't care anymore. The world that had been her carefully constructed facade was falling apart, and I didn't need to be there to witness it. She would figure it out on her own. As I stepped out into the cool night, the door of the restaurant closing behind me with a soft click, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. There was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and there was nothing she could do to change it. She would have to face the consequences of her actions, and I was finally ready to let go. I sat on the couch, the house feeling oddly still. The minutes dragged on as I waited, calm, even though I knew Catherine was on her way. My phone buzzed with messages from her, angry, pleading, accusing, but I ignored them. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in the papers I delivered. The truth was right in front of her now. The door slammed open around midnight, and Catherine stormed in, her face flushed with rage. Her eyes burned with fury, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed, glaring at me. "What the hell was that stunt tonight? Publicly humiliating me like that?" I didn't flinch. I'd been waiting for this, bracing for the storm. But this time, it wasn't going to shake me. It wasn't a stunt. It was just the truth, I said, my voice steady. A truth you've been avoiding for months. She laughed bitterly, stepping closer to me, her voice rising. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? You're the one who failed this marriage. You stopped being a husband a long time ago." She reached for her phone, pulling up some photos of us from happier days, trying to trigger some kind of response from me. "Remember this? The good times? Don't you care about any of this?" I looked at the pictures, but it was like looking at a different life, one that felt so distant now. "You want me to care?" I asked, my voice turning cold. "You want me to feel guilty? I stopped being your husband the moment you betrayed me. All of this," I gestured to the room, "is just a lie." Her face twisted with a mix of frustration and desperation. She stepped closer, her voice shaking now. "You think you're the only one who's suffered? You think you're the only one who's been hurt? You think you've been so perfect? I've been miserable too, Daniel. I've had to lie to get through the days, just like you." I met her gaze, unwavering. "I'm done listening to your excuses, Catherine. I'm done being your scapegoat." She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "You made this choice. You chose him. You chose to betray me. And I'm done trying to save something that you already gave up on." She stood there, mouth open, stunned by my words. But instead of speaking, she just shook her head, trying to process everything that was happening. "I don't need you to understand," I said, rising to my feet. "I've had enough of your manipulation. I'm done." I walked past her, heading up the stairs, and didn't look back. She called out my name, but I didn't stop. I had said all that needed to be said. The rest of the drama was hers to deal with. I was finished. The phone didn't stop buzzing. Catherine's calls, texts, voicemails, each one more frantic than the last, each one trying to draw me back into her web. I ignored them all. I didn't even feel the usual urge to check them, to see if she was sorry, to look for any sign that maybe, just maybe, she was waking up to the reality she had created. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring at the screen of my phone, the silence stretching on. It was deafening, but in a strange way, it was peaceful. I didn't know what I'd expected after everything that happened. Maybe an apology, or her begging me to take her back, to forgive her. But the silence was enough. The lack of noise, of manipulation, of constant emotional back and forth. It was the first time in years I could truly think clearly. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, not knowing where I was going, but knowing that I couldn't stay in the house. I drove aimlessly for a while, feeling the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. The memories were hard to escape. I couldn't help but think of the places Catherine and I had gone together, the dreams we'd shared, the way she'd looked at me before everything fell apart. But now, it all felt so distant. I wasn't the man I had been back then. I wasn't the man who let her manipulate me, who stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I stopped at a beach where Catherine and I used to go, back when things felt simple. I hadn't been there in a long time. I stood at the edge of the water, the waves rolling in and out, each one washing over my feet as I tried to collect my thoughts. The sound of the ocean was soothing, but the memories hit me hard. I could almost hear her voice, feel her presence beside me, but I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't the man who would let himself be deceived again. By the time I got home, the house was eerily quiet. The front door was still ajar, and as I stepped inside, I noticed immediately that something had changed. Catherine was gone. Her side of the closet was empty, the shelves bare. Her perfume was gone from the bathroom. The remnants of our life together were now just gone. There was no note, no explanation, just the cold, hollow feeling of her absence. I stood there for a moment, processing everything. The house that had once felt like home now felt like a stranger's house. The familiar clutter of her things, the little traces of her presence that had always been around, were gone. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel anything but relief. The weight of her presence had been lifted, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without wondering what she was thinking or what she was hiding. I walked upstairs and stood in front of our old bedroom, where everything had once seemed so certain. Now, it was just a room, empty like the rest of our marriage. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid to be alone. I wasn't afraid to let her go. I was free. The phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't from Catherine. It was her mother, and I could already imagine what the message would say before I even unlocked it. "You need to talk to Catherine. Everything can be fixed. She's hurting." I didn't respond. There was nothing to fix. The last thing I needed was more of her drama, more of the manipulation that had been her constant MO for years. I spent the day at home, in a haze of quiet, sorting through everything she left behind. There were the usual things: clothes she'd abandoned in piles, half-empty drawers, her expensive shoes I never understood the point of. But it wasn't just physical clutter. It was the residue of our life together, things that once had meaning, memories that once mattered. I picked up the photograph from our vacation in Italy. She was smiling, holding up a glass of wine, her eyes alight with joy. And I couldn't help but wonder how much of that joy had been real. Was that the real Catherine, or was that just the version of herself she wanted me to see? The anger started to rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. The last thing I needed was to go through this again. So I grabbed a box and started tossing everything in, symbolically throwing away the life I was so eager to leave behind. The last thing I pulled out was a small velvet box, her engagement ring. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if she had ever worn it with the same love I'd felt when I slipped it on her finger. Probably not. Before I could give it more thought, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from her lover. I didn't even have to look at the name. I knew who it was. His message read, "You really humiliated her last night. She's in tears. I don't know what your problem is, but you've made this public and destroyed everything." I sat back, a cold smirk forming on my face, as I typed a simple reply. "Tell her next time to choose someone smarter." I hit send and placed the phone down, feeling lighter, even though I knew the drama wasn't over. But for now, in this moment, it felt good to be so indifferent, to not care about the consequences of her actions. As I looked around the room, the remnants of our past, I realized how far I'd come. She couldn't pull me back in anymore. The weight of her lies, her manipulations, had finally been lifted. And now I was free. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and distant, much like the woman I was about to leave behind. I sat at the table, my suit fitting sharply, my posture stiff and composed. I had done my part in preparing for this day, and now there was nothing left but to let it unfold. Catherine hadn't arrived yet, and I knew it would be just like her, fashionably late, trying to maintain the illusion of control, of innocence. When the door finally swung open, there she was, Catherine. She walked in, wearing a white blazer, an effort to keep up the appearance of purity, of being the wrong party. I couldn't help but think how much she still tried to play the victim, even now, as if she hadn't been the one who set this whole thing in motion. She gave me a brief glance as she sat down, a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, trying to keep up appearances. Her lawyer, a slick, well-dressed man, immediately began pressing for mediation. Surely we can avoid the hassle of a trial. There must be a way to find common ground. I shook my head, the faintest of smirks curling at the corner of my mouth. There's no need for mediation. I've already made peace with my decision. The lawyer blinked, taken aback by my resolve. But Catherine's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to seeing me so firm. She tried to catch my eye, a silent plea, but I wasn't buying it anymore. The lawyer pressed on, attempting to draw out a response. "But Daniel, think of the effort and the cost. There's a chance for reconciliation." "No," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the noise. "I've thought about this for a long time. There's nothing left to reconcile." Catherine's jaw tightened, her breath slightly uneven, as if she hadn't prepared for me to be this calm, this composed. She leaned back, folding her arms across her chest. It was a subtle attempt to regain control, but it was futile. I wasn't the man she had married. Her lawyer finally relented, turning to the judge. We'll proceed with the divorce papers as they stand. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. There was no fanfare, no grand dramatic scene. It was just a legal formality now. My marriage was done. But as I watched Catherine, her face drained of any pretense, I realized something. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anything from her anymore. The papers were signed, the divorce was final. And as I left the courtroom, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. I wasn't expecting to run into Emily, but there she was, standing in the cafe, looking the same as always, kind eyes, warm smile. But today there was a heaviness in the air around her. She spotted me first, her face lighting up in surprise as she made her way toward me. "Daniel, it's been a while," she said softly, a hesitant smile on her lips. I didn't feel the old tension anymore. I was beyond the old fights, the whispered conversations that always seemed to happen when I wasn't around. "Yeah, it has been," I said, nodding toward the empty seat across from me. "Sit." She hesitated for just a second, then slid into the chair, clearly unsure of how to start. We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I tried to warn her," Emily said quietly. "I really did. But you know, Catherine, she doesn't listen to anyone, not when she's made up her mind." I wasn't sure what to say, but the words came out anyway. "I figured that much." Emily's eyes dropped to the table. "She never cried about losing you, you know. It wasn't about you at all. It was about losing control over you." I looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. I had known it in the back of my mind for a while now, but hearing it from someone else, someone who was still tied to Catherine, hit differently. "So, it wasn't about love, it was about power." Emily nodded slowly. "Exactly. She hated the idea of losing the control she had over you, over everything. And when she realized you weren't going to let her anymore," she trailed off, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back, trying to take it all in. "It's over now, Emily. It's really over." She looked up, her eyes tired but understanding. "I know, I never thought it would get this far. I'm sorry, Daniel. I should have said something sooner." I could see the regret in her eyes, but it wasn't her fault. She was just as caught in Catherine's web as I had been. "You didn't have to say anything," I said softly. I wasn't ready to hear it. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "She's going to regret it, you know, but by the time she does, it'll be too late." I nodded, knowing she was right. There was nothing left for me in that relationship. No more trying to fix what was broken beyond repair. Catherine's regret would never change the past. As I stood up, ready to leave, Emily caught my arm. "You're really done with her, aren't you?" I looked at her, feeling the last lingering ties to Catherine snapping like an old rope that had finally frayed. "Yeah, I'm done. I have to be." Emily smiled, a mix of sadness and relief in her expression. "Good for you, Daniel. I hope you find peace." I turned to walk away, but just before I stepped out of the cafe, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, seeing a message from Ava, the woman I had dated in college. She'd reached out, wanting to catch up. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of everything, the past, the divorce, the regret, lifting. I didn't feel the need to rush into anything. I wasn't looking for another relationship to fill the void. I was finally starting to find my own peace. I looked up at the sky, feeling lighter than I had in years. Catherine's grip on me was broken, and now it was time to reclaim my life. I needed a change of scenery. So I packed a bag, booked a flight, and left. No plans, no expectations, just a decision to finally live for myself. New Orleans was vibrant, alive, full of sounds and colors that felt like a breath of fresh air after being trapped in the gray haze of my past with Catherine. I walked the streets aimlessly, absorbing the energy of the city, the music that spilled from every bar and restaurant, the mix of laughter and chatter, the feeling that the world was full of possibilities. It was exactly what I needed. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Catherine. I wasn't worried about what she was doing, or who she was with, or how her life was continuing without me. It didn't matter anymore. That night, I ended up at a small jazz club tucked on a quiet street. The atmosphere was warm, with dim lighting and a steady stream of soulful music. I found a seat at the bar, ordered a drink, and just let myself relax. I wasn't tied to anyone or anything. The weight of the past was lifting with every note played. Then she walked in. Claire. A singer, the kind of woman who immediately commanded attention without trying. Her voice was raw, rich, and filled with emotion, spilling out from the stage like liquid gold. As she sang, I couldn't take my eyes off her. There was no pretense, no facade. She was just herself, free and unapologetic, something I hadn't realized I'd been craving. After her set, she came over to the bar, and we struck up a conversation. It was easy, natural. We talked about music, about life, about everything and nothing at all. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to fill a void. I was just enjoying the moment. "You look like someone who just got out of a cage," she said with a smile, taking a sip from her drink. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and warmth. I chuckled, taking a moment to process her words. She was right. I had been living in a cage, of my own making, bound by Catherine's grip, by my own guilt, by years of trying to make something work that was never meant to. But now, sitting here, across from someone who didn't need me to be anything but myself, I realized how much I had been holding back. "Yeah," I said, feeling the weight of the past finally fall off. "I guess I have." We continued talking, the hours slipping by unnoticed. There was no rush, no pressure to be anything other than who I was in that moment. By the time the night ended, I felt different, lighter, freer. I was no longer a man defined by his past, by the woman who had manipulated him, by the life that had been forced upon him. I was just Daniel, and for the first time, that felt like enough. As I walked back to my hotel, the cool night air wrapping around me, I knew that the change I needed had already begun. I had let go of Catherine, but I was now learning to let go of the past as well. I wasn't sure what came next, but I wasn't afraid to find out. I was in the produce aisle, reaching for some tomatoes when I heard her voice. It was unmistakable, Catherine calling out to me. I turned slowly, not out of urgency, but because I felt no need to rush. She stood there, just a few feet away, her hand resting casually on her lover's arm. He wore a casual suit, one of those high-end things that screamed, "I'm somebody." And Catherine was still the same, trying to control everything in her world, still acting as though nothing had changed. For a moment, I just looked at them. At her. Her eyes locked with mine, and I saw that flash of panic again, the recognition that I wasn't the same person she had left behind. She called out my name again, this time louder. "Daniel?" I nodded once, a small acknowledgement. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. Completely done with the woman who had once been my whole world. "Is everything okay?" she asked, like she hadn't just humiliated me, like I wasn't the one who had been discarded, like we hadn't just finished a chapter that should have been written long ago. I took a deep breath, looking at her, then at her lover, this man who had stepped into the life I once occupied. I didn't feel the jealousy, the anger, the despair that would have consumed me months ago. "You made a mistake, Catherine," I said, my voice calm, controlled. "But don't worry, I've long moved on from the life we had." She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came. It was almost as though she didn't know what to say anymore. Maybe she expected me to beg for closure, for a final word. But there was nothing left for me to say. I turned and walked away from her, not bothering to look back, the faint sound of her calling my name trailing behind me. I didn't need her validation, her approval, or her apology. I had already let go. As I walked out of the store, I felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted from my shoulders. The last piece of her control had slipped from my grasp. I was free, fully liberated. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I woke up early the next morning, the sunlight filtering through the blinds in the quiet of my empty home. The house felt different now, empty but not in a hollow way, more like a clean slate. I had cleared out everything she left behind, boxed up the pieces of our life together, and moved them to the attic, where they would gather dust like memories from another lifetime. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of me, staring out the window as I took it all in. I had spent so long feeling stuck, like I was chasing something I could never catch. But now, the weight that had been pressing on my chest was gone. I wasn't clinging to a past that no longer served me. I was free. I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank document. I hadn't written anything for myself in years. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of where to begin. But I knew I needed to take control of my life again, to start fresh. The first line I typed was simple but true. Never beg to be chosen. I paused, letting the words settle before typing the next line. Never accept betrayal. I felt a little weight lift off my shoulders as I wrote, as if I was finally freeing myself from the hold the past had on me. And the last line came naturally. Always remember your worth. I leaned back in my chair, reading the words. The lessons I had learned the hard way were now written down, a reminder of how far I had come. I wasn't the same man I had been when I walked into that restaurant, when I first realized Catherine had moved on and left me behind. I was stronger now. The doorbell rang, but I didn't feel that old rush of anxiety. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it to find a package on the doorstep. I picked it up, glancing at the return address. It was from my old college, a university alumni group reaching out for donations. But it didn't matter. I wasn't looking for anything from anyone anymore. I tossed the package into the recycling bin and returned to the kitchen, where my coffee had grown cold. But it didn't bother me. I wasn't waiting for anyone or anything anymore. I didn't need a phone call, a text, or an apology to validate me. I had learned to validate myself. I started a new chapter of my life, one that wasn't defined by anyone else. I wasn't defined by Catherine's lies, or the years I'd wasted trying to fix something broken. I wasn't the man who had once lived in fear of being alone. I was the man who had reclaimed his peace, his self-worth, and his future. And as I sat down, ready to take on the next part of my life, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.